when I started interacting with agents and authors from the left, I found that it did matter. And some people didn't like the idea of being on the same list with some of the conservatives who I traditionally published and who I will continue to publish. But others didn't mind and kind of liked the idea. So Zephyr is one of those people. And so I feel like she's she's part of my gang. She's one of my tribe.
So Zephyr Teachout, what was it like for you to work with Adam Bellow, who has a conservative reputation?
Adam has a great reputation as an editor, and he had worked with one of my favorite writers, someone named Barry Lynn, who was one of the first to really punch through consensus in economic thinking and say, hey, one of the problems we might have in America is a problem of concentrated economic power. So when I set forth to write this book that I'm writing about monopolies and what we can do about it, I was really excited to work with somebody who understood that there's a real moment in American economic thinking, and we have an opportunity to reshape the way that we think about the economy and the relationship between the economy and the democracy.
Aren't some monopolies, though, natural?
The point of my book is that we are in a moment of a crisis of concentrated economic power. And that's really threatening our democracy. And this concentrated corporate power is at the root of so many different issues that we see that we don't connect to concentration of power.
Connect one for us.
But to answer your question, there's this whole suite of tools in American history, including basic antitrust, breaking up big companies, and also including saying once in a while there's going to be a company that we want to be really big and concentrated. But if it is going to be big and concentrated, some people talk about it in the language of natural monopoly, then there's certain rules that have to apply. And I think of these broadly as all anti-monopoly rules. They're not just smash it up, they're also, if you're going to control the market, well then you got to be neutral. And you cannot discriminate in ways that you might be able to if you were just a small fish in a big pond.
So we need new rules, we need to enforce the rules we have on hand?
All of the above. Step one is recognizing the problem, is seeing that I think a lot of people feel this incredible sense of uncertainty and destabilization, and that we have a crisis of powerlessness. That in fact one of the sources of our democratic crisis is people feeling so out of power that they either check out and don't vote, or choose to vote for somebody who they may not agree with, but it's just, who cares about my vote? Doesn't matter. I'm not connected to power anyway. And once you understand that the problem is a problem of power, then we can start looking at solutions. The solutions lie both in our history and in our future. Recovering all the tools that were used up until 1981, which is when we stopped enforcing antitrust laws, but also saying, hey, we have some new puzzles. The problem of big tech. How do we deal with Facebook and Amazon and Google that are similar to, but not the same as, some of the monopolists of the Gilded Age? I'll give you an example of monopoly that, or a monopoly crisis that I think we can all relate to. You may have heard about farmers struggling, but at the same time, plenty of people are eating corn and using soy products. So if you think about corn or soy farmers struggling, there's a mystery there. And the truth is there's a lot of money being made in farming. It's just not by the farmers. It's Monsanto, which has a monopoly over the seeds, John Deere, which has close to a monopoly over both the tractors and credit, as farmers rely on John Deere for their lending. Bayer, which is now merging with Monsanto. And then ADM, which is often the sole buyer for farmers. So you can think of this farmer who we think of as the symbol of freedom in a lot of ways. The independent farmer, who still looks independent. It's still his or her own farm. We call him, in our statistics, independent businessman or independent businesswoman. But all his or her choices are dictated by these 4 different companies that control their ability to farm at all. That's a crisis in farming, but the more you look at different industries, the more you see the same thing, is the middlemen taking all the value. And while they're taking that value, they're also taking away freedom. So this is one of the things that Bernie Sanders talked about in his campaign, is that the amount of money for dollar made in agriculture by the farmer was going way down, while money in farming was going way up. Why is that? It's because most farmers don't have choices of who to sell to, they don't have choices of who to buy from, and they don't have choices of who to borrow from. And when you start to be squeezed in all of these different ways, it's a financial crisis, but it's a freedom crisis too. Because those farmers are not waking up in the morning and saying, hey, I'm going to read the most recent research and figure out the best way to plant my crops. They're saying, if I don't plant this way, I'm not going to be able to sell to ADM or use Monsanto seeds.
Zephyr Teachout, in your book, Break 'em Up, you also are critical of the left and how they are fighting some of these issues.
Well, I think what we've seen is in 1981, the Reagan administration effectively dismantled our long history of anti-monopoly laws. But then Democratic presidents after Reagan didn't then revive them. Instead, we came to something close to a consensus that mergers were going to happen, this monopolization of the economy was just going to happen. And the left was, or Democrats were split between those who too easily accepted the Reagan perspective and those who so fundamentally rejected the idea of marketplaces and open markets that they weren't as interested in the anti-monopoly issue. I think that's changing now in some people's understanding, but what hasn't changed is we haven't had, and I call for in my book, we haven't had a national antitrust movement. So as much as you might talk to progressive on the street about the problem of Monsanto and Bayer merging, they shouldn't merge, I think almost any lefty I talk to would say, yeah, they shouldn't merge. But there weren't protests in the street about the merger. There weren't tens of thousands of phone calls to Congress members about it. There wasn't the kind of grassroots activism showing that distaste. And I think part of the reason is that people, even on the left, feel a sense of inevitability, that these companies are just going to be able to do it, and it's not inevitable. A big point of the book is that we have a choice. We don't have to have a concentrated economy. We don't have to have 3 companies control all of chicken distribution and 2 companies control all of beer. We can actually have a thriving, more innovative, more decentralized economy.
You've personally attacked big government as well. I mean, you've run as an outsider for office.
Well, those are two different things. What I have been very critical of, and I think is important to recognize, is the areas where government, which is supposed to represent the public, in fact represents big business.